Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Can I ask Mr Tim Wilson to come up to the table, please, up to the big table? I think we're going to have to invest in longer desks, maybe. We've had this problem a few times. Thank you. So, Mr Wilson, I'll get cracking because I haven't got very long. You're planning to hold a national symposium about free speech and I think also focusing on freedom of association, religion, expression and property. Is that right?
Tim Wilson, Human Rights Commissioner, that's correct.
Thank you. Can you tell me where you intend to go?
Where we intend to go, we're mapping it out at the moment. Staff at the Commission have come up with proposals, but one of the things I've made very clear is I want to get outside of capital cities to get to all parts of the country, obviously within reason, within budgetary constraints, to work with local community groups, human rights groups, and opening up the opportunity for other groups that may be interested in human rights to host functions where I can come, speak, consult and hear the concerns. So I know that's the answer. The whole country is probably unsatisfactory, but that is the intent.
Thank you. That's answer to my question. How much is budgeted to cover the costs of the symposium?
We don't know the answer to that question at this time. We have allocated within the Commission resources of, and the President may stand correct me, but I think it's $50,000. But we are also seeking private sector support and sponsorship for the event, so we can either reduce the cost to the taxpayer or in fact not have any cost to the taxpayer.
Okay, I might come back to that one then, thanks. I was just wondering if the 2014 budget had any impact on the scope of what you'd been planning.
This was from existing resources allocated from within the Commission.
So is there going to have to be a rethink then about that initial cost that was allocated given the budget?
Not that I'm aware of, because the resources will be coming out of this financial year. And again, that's partly why I'm keen to see where avenues for private sector support and sponsorship come in to reduce any cost of the taxpayer. Okay.
Now, those freedoms that you're planning on investigating or inviting debate about, they often do excite some tension, and one of them would be freedom of association. Will you be looking at unions and issues associated with the regulation of unions and the way that intersects with freedom of association?
Well, I'm not going to put anything on or off the table, but that was part of the intention, to look at the full breadth of freedom of association, not just for those who choose to associate in one direction, but also whether people choose not to associate at the same time.
You'd probably be aware that recent government legislation, the Fair Work legislation, particularly the registered organisations and ABCC bills, excited concerns about infringement on rights, traditional rights such as freedom of association. Certainly the Parliamentary Joint Commission of Human Rights and the Law Council, among others submitters, raised concerns about those. Are they the sort of issues that you would be envisaging canvassing in this Freedom Symposium?
Well, the symposium is focused primarily on freedom of speech, to bring in breadth of issues around matters of speech. The national consultations will be the ones that will engage issues around association. We will have a process where people can submit ideas and things that they think should be part of the discussion, and that will be obviously directly, people can post things or online, but of course people can raise at the fora we have throughout the country to bring those things in. So if people wish to submit that, that's certainly part of the discussion.
So when you talk about freedom of speech, I did get the impression from your earlier answer that you would also potentially, the Freedom Symposium would actually encompass a broader range than...
No, the symposium is to focus on freedom of speech.
Right.
The national consultations is about the broader issues.
So I think it's probably fair to say, and I'm interested in teasing this out a bit more, is that certainly in relation to some of the commentary on the Fair Work legislation, there were also issues of freedom of speech and the ability for unions to represent their members and speak on issues. So you wouldn't be ruling that out, presumably, in terms of the discussion.
I'm certainly not intending to rule that out. If, as part of the broader discussion around freedom of speech, any infringement needs to be discussed, and I'm very open to it and to including that as part of the discussion.
All right, other areas of freedom of speech that have come up recently in modern times are new laws in Victoria giving police enhanced powers to move peaceful protesters on, and the effect of secondary boycott laws.
Yes.
Will you be canvassing those sorts of issues in this symposium?
As Australian Human Rights Commissioner, my focus is on federal law, and so primarily I'll be focusing on federal law, but other issues in terms of trends that may come out of state law would also be canvassed and included in part of that discussion. Certainly I know the secondary boycott provisions are part of federal law, so that will be part of it, and that's why the approach is to look at things in breadth to identify patterns and to try and provide some sort of roadmap about, well, if we want to advance freedom of speech, what are the sorts of barriers that exist, where do they exist, and how can they be constructively reformed, often to achieve the policy objective that perhaps they were introduced for, but without infringing speech as much or not, if preferably not at all.
The sponsorship is an interesting issue. So how are you, who are you approaching? And what sort of, I suppose, transparency will there be about who's sponsoring the Freedom Symposium, and how will you be managing, I think, probably potential risks in terms of influence and, outcome?
Well,
or perceptions of risk, shall we say?
Sure. We haven't approached anybody directly yet, but the Commission has guidelines specifically around sponsorship, because obviously this is not the first time that we have sought it, to make sure that there is transparency and accountability, and to make sure it's not deemed to be unduly influencing the work of the Commission. I'll be following those guidelines, and staff are looking over those at the moment and making sure that we adhere to them to make sure there aren't any conflicts. But in the end, the direction and focus will be driven by the Commission, and obviously myself as Human Rights Commissioner, to make sure the focus of the work is on approaching it from a free speech perspective.
Thank you for that. If I can turn now to Section 18C, and particularly yesterday it was confirmed by the Attorney-General that he'd received 5,557 submissions from the public about the proposed changes to Section 18C. From my understanding, I understand that the vast majority of those were against the proposed changes, but we weren't able to get
from Senator Wright, because I gave no such evidence.
No, and I was about
nor
to,
has there been any report to that effect.
I was about to say that. My understanding from the people who have advised me about having made submissions is that there was. This is my understanding, and I'm going to put what I heard from the Attorney-General yesterday. My understanding is that, in fact, a vast majority of those were against. However, I was about to say the Attorney-General assured us that there were many in favour, many against, and many having some form of middle ground.
That's right.
We don't know, though, because those submissions have not been published. And I'm interested in knowing what your view is about that. Do you think that those submissions should be published, given that I think a lot of people expected that they would be, given the clause that they agreed to?
Well, that's a policy question, really, Senator Wright.
Speculate on whether the submissions are in favour or against.
No, I'm not asking you to do
So I'm
that.
not sure what part of the question that was.
I'm asking
I guess
you.
the question is, do you think
as
it
freedom
is an
of
opinion, but I
speech
guess in
commissioner.
your Commissioner's role, you'd be entitled to be asked what do you think about in the relationship to freedom, whether they should be or shouldn't be published, but I'm sure you'll be able to handle it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My answer to that is that, as I understand it, and I would have to go back and have a look, on the website, which asked for submissions, it did not say that submissions would be made public. Therefore, if somebody sends something in, it needn't necessarily be made public without, or shouldn't be made public without their wishes, which is why in the case of the Commission's submission and my secondary or sort of parallel submission, I think we included explicitly statements that said that we were open to them being made public. And that's why we've also published them on the website of the Commission. So we have a choice, but ultimately it isn't the role of the government to breach confidence if they didn't say from the outset that they would be made public.
Well, perhaps I actually have the wording from the website here, and then I can ask your opinion about that. So it says, submissions will not be made public without consent from the author.
Right.
Personal information will be collected for the purposes of verifying submissions are not duplicates and in providing advice to government. Please advise if you wish to remain anonymous or wish to use a pseudonym when sending your submission. Now, my understanding is, and certainly the submission that we made, specifically consented to publication, and submitters have put to us that they assume that there would be. The implication is that there will be publication if someone explicitly gives consent. I'm just asking you, do you think Australians would like to know what these submissions say about this important issue? Is there a freedom of
Senator
speech
Wright,
issue here?
I don't think you should embarrass the witness by asking him something that has nothing to do with his role. If you want to know what the government's thinking is, you can ask me, and you did ask me yesterday.
I did ask you, and I know what your thinking is, Attorney, but I was interested. If he doesn't want to answer, that's fine. I just thought he's on the record about freedom of speech.
It's not a question of not wanting to answer. I mean, the government invited submissions on terms, all right?
Yes. All right. Well, look,
and we're going to
observe.
we're going to respect the terms on which that invitation was made to the public.
I'd like to ask a couple of other questions while I have the time. Thank you. Yes, thank you. So thank you for that, Attorney General. You are clearly on the record about what you said about that yesterday. Do you, Mr. Wilson, I'm interested in your view about the exposure draft that was put out about the proposed changes. What do you think that the exemption in the exposure draft was too wide, too broad?
I'm not sure that. I mean, I need some advice, I guess. Asking opinions of witnesses is clearly contrary to Senate rules. Perhaps as a commissioner in this area, the rules might be different for Mr.
Chairman, Mr. Wilson, I should point out to you, has made a submission, and I don't think there should be any problem with inviting Mr. Wilson to speak to the matters addressed in his submission.
Well, perhaps if I could rephrase.
All right for Mr. Sarpomasain.
No, that's not what I was. No, you asked him a question which was a dishonest question because it was based on a false premise.
No, it was not a dishonest question.
And that was my objection. I have no problem with Dr. Sarpomasain expressing his views. His views are very well known, and they will listened to and read respectfully by me. I have no difficulty at all with any of the commissioners putting their views. But the question you asked...
But you wouldn't allow him to put his views.
No, I took an objection to a question of yours because in a dishonest way you based the question on a false premise.
That is rubbish.
Can I just continue with the question?
Yes, well, Senator Wright, you've really outside your time.
I wasn't doing the question.
Yeah, well,
at that point.
I don't make the rules of the
So, Mr.
Senate.
Wilson, do you still support altering the Racial Discrimination Act as originally proposed by the Attorney General? And you made a submission. I'm asking you to... Your submission is public. Well, I don't know if it's public, but presumably it is. Yes, thank you. Do you still support altering it? Have you changed your views?
Senator Wright, I have made it quite clear that I support in the public domain change the Racial Discrimination Act. That includes the submission which is available on the website, which is publicly accessible. I have not changed my view, but I have said with relation to the proposal or the exposure draft that was put out by the government that is a good basis to start the discussion around how it should be changed. Now I'm interested in seeing what the Attorney-General comes up with next.
And what change...
Thanks, Mr. William. Thanks, Senator Wright. Senator Sasolji, for about 12 minutes, then to Senator Seward.
Thank you, Chair.